Ambassador Klox'rith stared at the featureless gray wall of his prison cell aboard the human warship Vengeance. The name seemed particularly fitting now. His four-fingered hands trembled slightly as he adjusted the thermal regulator on his containment suit. The humans kept the temperature at precisely the level that would keep him alive, but perpetually uncomfortable. Just one of their many subtle reminders of who was in control. Stupid, 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 he muttered to himself, a habit he'd developed during his 63 cycles of existence, but never quite so relevant as now. We thought ourselves so clever. The apex predators of the galaxy, outsmarting the primitive bipeds. A bitter laugh escaped his breathing apparatus, the sound distorted and hollow. The humans had a saying he'd once found charmingly quaint: don't poke the bear. He'd researched these bears during his diplomatic tenure on Earth. Dangerous creatures, but nothing compared to the true apex predators of the cosmos. Or so the Vesperian Confederation had believed. How catastrophically wrong they had been. The lighting in his cell dimmed slightly, indicating the ship's transition to night cycle. Not that it mattered much to Klox'rith. Sleep had become elusive since his capture 3 weeks ago. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the burning wreckage of the Vesperian capital ships, the unprecedented fury of the human counterattack. Klox'rith shifted on his too small bunk, designed for human proportions with seemingly deliberate disregard for his taller, more angular frame. The discomfort was probably intentional too. The humans were nothing if not meticulous in their revenge. He still remembered the day of first contact, 15 Earth years ago. The Vesperian scout ships had detected the human exploration vessel near the Arcturus system. Standard protocol dictated immediate elimination of potential competitors, but something about the primitive design of the human ship had piqued the High Council's curiosity. They'd decided observation was more prudent than destruction. A rare moment of restraint that had led to formal diplomatic relations. We should have followed protocol, Klox'rith whispered to the empty cell. A quick, clean elimination would have spared trillions. The Vesperians had approached cautiously, initiating communication through mathematical sequences. The humans responded with surprising sophistication for a species that had barely managed interstellar travel. Their eagerness to establish peaceful relations seemed almost childlike to the ancient Vesperian Confederation. Within months, trade agreements were signed. Within years, cultural exchanges began. The humans shared their art, music, literature. The Vesperians shared carefully selected technological advancements, nothing that could potentially threaten their military superiority. Klox'rith had been appointed as the primary diplomatic liaison to Earth, tasked with assessing human capabilities while presenting a facade of interspecies friendship. He'd reported back to the High Council regularly. Humans were technologically underdeveloped, but learning at an alarming rate. Militarily unsophisticated but curiously obsessed with warfare throughout their history, physically unimpressive but remarkably adaptable. His final assessment had been damning in its miscalculation. The humans pose no significant threat to Vesperian dominance. Their emotional attachments render them vulnerable and predictable. They trust too easily and forgive too readily. They are ripe for exploitation. The High Council had agreed unanimously. The plan was set in motion. None of them had understood the fundamental truth about humanity that Klox'rith now knew with bone-deep certainty. Humans might forgive many things, but betrayal was not among them. And when betrayed, these seemingly soft, emotional creatures transformed into something his language had no words to describe. The cell door hissed open, interrupting his grim reflections. Captain Eleanor Banks stood in the doorway, her expression unreadable as always. "It's time for your interrogation, Ambassador," she said, the title now a mockery. "Admiral Blackwood has some questions about the remaining Vesperian outposts." Klox'rith rose slowly to his feet. Another day of questioning, another day of watching his people's 1,000-year empire crumble under the relentless human response to a betrayal they should never have survived. A response the Vesperian Confederation had never seen coming. The memories of those early days flooded back to Klox'rith as Captain Banks escorted him down the sterile corridor of the Vengeance. How quickly things had changed, how spectacularly they had miscalculated. 15 years ago, the formal trade negotiations had begun with such promise. The humans, represented by the newly formed United Earth Coalition, had approached the talks with a mixture of caution and unbridled excitement that the Vesperians found both amusing and useful. You should have seen their faces when we demonstrated our atmospheric terraforming technology. Klox'rith had reported to High Chancellor Pex Voran during their encrypted communication. They practically salivated. I believe we can extract significant concessions in exchange for watered-down versions of our 7th cycle innovations. The High Chancellor's membrane-covered eyes had contracted with pleasure. Excellent work, Ambassador. Continue to foster their trust. Remember our primary objective. And Klox'rith had done exactly that, with enthusiasm that bordered on genuine. Earth had been assigned to him as his first major diplomatic post, and success meant elevation to the inner circle of the Confederation. He'd studied human languages, customs, even their ridiculous entertainment programs to better understand how to manipulate them. What he hadn't expected was Captain Eleanor Banks. Ambassador Klox'rith, welcome to the North American Diplomatic Center, she'd said at their first meeting, pronouncing his name with perfect inflection. A rarity among humans whose vocal structures struggled with Vesperian consonant clusters. I'm Captain Eleanor Banks, your assigned liaison officer. I look forward to a productive relationship between our species. Banks had been different from the start. Where other humans openly displayed awe or poorly disguised fear in the presence of Vesperians, she maintained a composed, analytical demeanor. Her questions were incisive, her observations uncomfortably perceptive. Klox'rith had initially flagged her as a potential complication. Yet over the following months, a genuine rapport developed between them. Banks showed Klox'rith the natural wonders of Earth, the Grand Canyon, the Northern Lights, the Great Barrier Reef. In turn, he shared sanitized insights into Vesperian culture. They spent hours discussing philosophy, history, the fundamental differences and surprising similarities between their species. You know what I find fascinating about humans? Klox'rith had told her during a diplomatic reception in Geneva. A capacity for contradiction. You wage wars over resources yet share food with strangers. You cling to tribal identities yet dream of unified futures. You fear difference yet seek it out across the stars. Banks had smiled, that enigmatic expression he'd come to recognize but never fully understand. Perhaps that's why we've survived this long. We contain multitudes. Meanwhile, the technological exchange program flourished exactly as the High Council had planned. Humans shared everything, their medical advancements, their unique approach to artificial intelligence, their surprisingly elegant solutions to quantum communication problems. The Vesperians shared only what the High Council deemed safe, impressive enough to maintain human interest, but nothing that could threaten Vesperian military superiority. What the humans couldn't know, was that their openness was being weaponized against them. Every innovation they shared was analyzed for military applications. Every weakness in their defensive systems was cataloged for future exploitation. Every colony location was mapped for the eventual takeover. The Vesperian Science Directorate worked tirelessly to incorporate human technological innovations into their own systems. Human approaches to neural networking proved particularly valuable, accelerating Vesperian weapons development by nearly 30 cycles. Their unusual solutions to radiation shielding allowed for significant advancements in Vesperian warship design. The primitives have their uses. High General Drevmore had remarked during a secure council session that Klox'rith attended via quantum projection. Their minds work along such strange pathways that they occasionally stumble upon solutions our more logical processes might overlook. And once we've extracted all useful innovations, asked Sub-Chancellor Linth. High Chancellor Pex Voran's breathing tubes had expanded with anticipation. Then we implement Phase 2. Ambassador Klox'rith has provided us with everything we need to know about their colonial defense systems. But Klox'rith remembered feeling a moment of unexpected hesitation. He'd pushed it aside immediately. His loyalty was to the Confederation. Humans were simply a resource to be harvested, their worlds ripe for Vesperian expansion. That Captain Banks would be among the casualties was unfortunate but necessary. Or so he had believed, before he learned what humans were truly capable of when betrayed by those they had trusted. The day of the attack, Klox'rith had been attending a diplomatic gala at the United Earth Coalition headquarters in Geneva. He remembered sipping the strange human beverage they called champagne, watching the bubbles rise, while knowing that across the galaxy, the Vesperian armada was preparing to strike. His communication device gave 3 subtle vibrations against his thorax. In the signal, he excused himself from a conversation with a Brazilian diplomat and retreated to a secluded balcony overlooking Lake Geneva. The night air was cool and crisp, stars visible above despite the city lights. He activated his quantum encoder and transmitted the final defense codes for the human colony worlds of New Horizon, Elysium, and Proxima Centauri Station. It felt almost too easy. The humans had trusted him with everything. Captain Banks had personally guided him through Earth's defense network during what she called a goodwill tour 6 months earlier. The memory made his primary heart constrict uncomfortably. Confirmation received came the encrypted response from High General Drev Moore. Phase 2 commences in 30 standard minutes. Return to the Vesperian embassy immediately. Klox'rith had done as instructed, slipping away from the gala with a diplomatic excuse about cultural observances. By the time he reached the embassy, the attacks had begun. The Vesperian fleet struck the 3 human colonies simultaneously. New Horizon was the largest target, a thriving agricultural world with a population of 12 million. The planetary defense grid, designed to activate automatically at the first sign of hostile approach, remained dormant thanks to the override codes Klox'rith had provided. The Vesperian warships entered orbit unopposed. The tactical feeds streaming to the embassy's secure command center showed the precision bombing of major population centers. The humans never stood a chance. Their primitive planetary militias scrambled retrofitted cargo ships in desperate defense, only to be vaporized by Vesperian pulse cannons before they cleared the atmosphere. Elysium, the scientific outpost orbiting Tau Ceti, fell even more quickly. The research station's experimental shield technology, ironically developed with Vesperian assistance, failed exactly as planned. 17,000 scientists, engineers, and their families were exposed to hard vacuum when the habitat rings were breached by targeted fusion missiles. Proxima Centauri Station, humanity's oldest extrasolar settlement, managed to launch a handful of escape vessels before the Vesperian dreadnought inevitable dominance reduced the orbital platform to superheated debris. Long-range scanners indicated that most escape pods were tracked and eliminated, though several managed to activate their primitive FTL drives and disappear from sensor range. Within 6 hours, 3 vibrant human colonies had been reduced to smoldering ruins or drifting wreckage. Conservative estimates placed human casualties at 14 million. Phase 2 had been executed with textbook efficiency. A glorious day for the Confederation, High Chancellor Pexvoran declared in a secure transmission to all Vesperian officials. His breathing tubes were fully extended in the traditional posture of triumph. The human response has been exactly as predicted. Their planetary defense forces are scrambling in disarray. Their communications networks are flooded with panic and confusion. Ambassador Klox'rith's psychological assessment was perfect. These emotional creatures are paralyzed by shock and grief. The High Chancellor's personal commendation had filled Klox'rith with pride. He'd fulfilled his duty to the Confederation. The path to resource acquisition and territorial expansion lay open. Phase 3, the systematic conquest of remaining human worlds, would begin after a standard 30-day period, allowing time for human morale to completely collapse. Yet in the days that followed, strange reports began filtering through Vesperian intelligence channels. Earth had gone silent. Not the chaotic panic the Vesperians had expected, but an eerie, organized silence. Commercial traffic between human worlds ceased completely. All diplomatic outposts were evacuated with military precision. Human representatives to galactic forums quietly departed without explanation. Most concerning of all, the human military vessels, their primitive dreadnoughts and carriers, were nowhere to be found. Long-range scanners detected massive energy signatures as the ships activated their FTL drives, but their destinations remained unknown. When Klox'rith brought these anomalies to the attention of the High Council, his concerns were dismissed. "They flee before our might," Sub-Chancellor Linth declared confidently. "They have abandoned their colonies and retreated to their homeworld." Exactly as anticipated. But Klox'rith had spent years studying humans. Something about their response felt wrong. The silence was not the silence of defeat. It was something else entirely. On the 28th day after the attack, a lone human transport approached the Vesperian diplomatic vessel in orbit around Jupiter. It requested permission to dock, citing diplomatic protocols. Curiously, it was Captain Eleanor Banks who made the request personally. Against his better judgment, driven by a mixture of curiosity and perhaps a touch of what humans called guilt, Klox'rith authorized the docking procedure. It was the last order he would give as a free Vesperian. When the human response finally came, it arrived with neither warning nor mercy. For precisely 30 standard days after the attack, the mysterious silence from Earth and its remaining colonies had continued. The Vesperian High Council interpreted this as confirmation of their strategic brilliance. Preparations for Phase 3, the complete subjugation of remaining human territories, proceeded ahead of schedule. The psychological warfare component has exceeded expectations, declared High General Drev Moore during the final planning session. "Our intelligence suggests the humans are completely demoralized. Their governmental structures are in disarray. This species lacks the mental fortitude to recover from such a decisive blow." Klox'rith, now elevated to senior diplomatic strategist following his successful infiltration of human defenses, nodded in agreement. Yet a nagging doubt persisted. After his capture by Captain Banks, a swift, efficient operation that had caught him completely unprepared, he had been held in isolation aboard her vessel for 10 days before being transferred to the Vengeance. During that time, the silence from both his captors and the Confederation had been absolute. Then came the 31st day. The first indication that something was catastrophically wrong came when the Vesperian homeworld's orbital defense network suddenly went offline. Not damaged or destroyed, simply offline, as if someone had thrown a switch. The backup systems activated immediately, of course, but they too failed within minutes. Reports flooded in from panicked defense coordinators across the Vesperian capital. Someone had inserted a cascading virus into the defense grid's quantum processors. The virus bore the unmistakable signatures of Vesperian military encryption, but contained mathematical approaches never before seen in Confederation programming. It was, Klox'rith realized with dawning horror, a hybrid creation. Vesperian architecture infused with human ingenuity. Their own technology turned against them with devastating effectiveness. Before the High Council could fully comprehend what was happening, the second phase of the human response began. A fleet of vessels emerged from FTL at the edge of the Vesperian home system. They were not the primitive warships Confederation intelligence had documented. These were something new, sleeker, darker, bearing an unfamiliar configuration that somehow incorporated both human and Vesperian design elements. At the center of the formation was a massive dreadnought, unlike anything in known space. Its hull was midnight black, absorbing rather than reflecting light. Its designation, transmitted on all frequencies in perfect Vesperian language, retribution. The human commander identified himself on an open channel to the entire Vesperian system. This is Admiral Marcus Blackwood of the United Earth Fleet. Your unprovoked attack on our colonies has been classified as an act of genocide under Galactic Concordat statutes. We have come for justice. The Admiral's voice was calm, methodical, utterly devoid of the emotion Vesperians had come to expect from humans. That absence of feeling was somehow more terrifying than rage would have been. Your defensive capabilities have been neutralized using access protocols provided by your own diplomatic corps. Your military response options have been anticipated and countered. Unconditional surrender is your only logical choice. Watching the transmission from his holding cell aboard Captain Banks' ship, Klox'rith felt his secondary heart nearly stop. This was not possible. Humans were a primitive, emotional species. They could not have developed this level of military technology. They could not have penetrated Vesperian security so completely. Yet the evidence was undeniable. While the Confederation had smugly believed humans were cowering in defeat, they had instead been preparing, adapting, combining Vesperian technology with their own unpredictable innovation. When High Chancellor Pex Voran issued the order for the Confederation's reserve fleet to engage the human invaders, Klox'rith knew with terrible certainty that his people had gravely miscalculated. They had judged humans by Vesperian standards. They had expected a species that, when wounded, would retreat to lick its wounds. Instead, they had awakened a species that, when betrayed, transformed into something else entirely. Something implacable. Something that would not stop until balance was restored. Something that did not forgive. What followed was not a war. It was a hunt. The Vesperian Reserve Fleet engaged Admiral Blackwood's forces with the full might of Confederation military doctrine. 6 dreadnoughts, 22 cruisers, and over 100 support craft against a numerically inferior human force. By all tactical projections, the humans should have been overwhelmed within hours. Instead, the battle lasted exactly 17 minutes. Human vessels moved with impossible precision, anticipating Vesperian formations before they fully deployed. Their weapons targeted specific subsystems with surgical accuracy, not to destroy, but to disable. One by one, Confederation ships found themselves adrift, life support intact but weapons and propulsion systems irreparably damaged. "They're not trying to kill us," Klox'rith whispered as he watched the tactical display aboard the human vessel. "Why aren't they trying to kill us?" Captain Banks, standing beside him, answered without emotion. "Dead enemies can't witness consequences. Admiral Blackwood wants your people to see everything that follows." What followed was a systematic dismantling of the Vesperian Confederation's leadership structure. Not through random bombardment or indiscriminate slaughter, but through targeted extraction operations unlike anything in recorded galactic history. 3 days after the battle in the home system, Klox'rith was transferred to the Vengeance. It was there that he first encountered the human special forces unit designated Revenant Squad. They didn't look like soldiers, not in the Vesperian sense of uniformed, regimented warriors. Each member appeared uniquely equipped, with specialized gear that seemed tailored to individual preferences rather than standardized protocols. Their leader, a weathered human female with skin darker than space itself and eyes that reflected nothing, introduced herself as Commander Amara Okafor. "Ambassador," she acknowledged with a nod that contained neither respect nor hatred. "You get to watch the show from the front row." The show, as she called it, began with real-time feeds from across Vesperian space. Using the intelligence Klox'rith had unwittingly provided during his diplomatic tenure, combined with the access codes Captain Banks had extracted during his initial interrogation, Revenant Squad initiated what they clinically termed Operation Consequences. Sub-Chancellor Linth was the first target. Security footage showed 4 Revenant operatives materializing in his secure compound on Vesperia Prime. The compound's defense systems, designed to detect any known form of stealth technology, registered nothing until the humans were already inside. They moved like liquid shadow, neutralizing 20 elite guards without firing a single lethal shot. When they reached Linth's inner sanctum, they simply stood, waiting. Linth activated his emergency beacon, which triggered not the expected security response, but instead a building-wide broadcast of Sub-Chancellor Linth's private communications, including his enthusiastic approval of the attack on New Horizon. Watching in his cell, Klox'rith felt his breathing tubes constrict. The humans had turned the Vesperians' own security systems against them with a level of infiltration that should have been impossible. General Drev Moore fell next. Not in his military command center, but in his supposedly secret bunker 10 kilometers beneath the surface of Vesperia's largest moon. Again, Revenant operatives appeared without warning, bypassed supposedly impenetrable security, and extracted their target with terrifying efficiency. One by one, the architects of the attack on human colonies were located, captured, and transported to holding cells aboard various human vessels. No collateral damage, no civilian casualties. Just the relentless, mechanical precision of a species that had transcended emotion to become something colder, more calculating than Vesperians had believed possible. The most shocking operation came when Klox'rith witnessed, via direct feed to his cell, the capture of High Chancellor Pex Voran himself. The High Chancellor had retreated to the ancient ceremonial fortress of Keth Moral, a structure carved into a mountain range and guarded by the Confederation's most elite warriors. 10,000 soldiers, autonomous defense drones, and energy shields that could withstand orbital bombardment protected the single most important Vesperian alive. Commander Okafor's squad didn't bother with stealth this time. They deployed from orbit in what humans called drop pods, ballistic entry vehicles that screamed through the atmosphere trailing fire. Vesperian anti-aircraft batteries tracked and fired, scoring direct hits on several pods. The pods contained no humans. They were decoys, distractions. The real insertion came from below. Tunneling vehicles, clearly incorporating Vesperian mining technology, but enhanced with human innovations, breached the fortress's subterranean levels. Revenant operatives emerged directly into the High Chancellor's inner sanctum. Impossible, Pex Voran gasped on the video feed, his membrane-covered eyes widening in shock. Our sensors were designed to detect threats you could imagine, completed Commander Okafor, removing her tactical helmet. We became something you couldn't imagine. When panic finally spread through the Confederation leadership, planetary governors and regional commanders began transmitting desperate surrender offers. They promised reparations, territorial concessions, technological exchanges, anything to halt the inexorable human advance. Admiral Blackwood's response was broadcast across all Vesperian frequencies. Your surrender is noted. Your terms are irrelevant. This is not a negotiation. This is consequences. Watching the systematic dismantling of his civilization's leadership, Klox'rith finally understood what the humans had become during those 30 days of silence. They had transformed their grief and rage into something cold, precise, and unstoppable. They had become the perfect predator to hunt those who had betrayed them. As the dismantling of the Vesperian leadership continued, Klox'rith found himself summoned to the Vengeance's interrogation chamber. Unlike previous sessions, this one was attended not only by Captain Banks but also by Admiral Blackwood himself. The Admiral was a surprisingly small human with silver-streaked hair and eyes that seemed to hold the cold emptiness of space. Ambassador Banks began, the familiar title now weighted with irony. I believe it's time we had an honest conversation about how this all began. Klox'rith straightened his posture, clinging to what little dignity remained. I have already provided all tactical information relevant to your operations. This isn't about tactics, Admiral Blackwood interjected, his voice unnervingly calm. This is about understanding. Banks activated a holographic display. To Klox'rith's shock, it showed a secure Confederation Council chamber meeting from 2 years earlier. His own image was there, reporting to the High Council about human vulnerabilities. The audio was crystal clear. How did you get this? Klox'rith gasped, his breathing apparatus wheezing with distress. "We've known about the planned betrayal for nearly 3 years," Banks replied, a hint of the old familiarity creeping into her voice. "Every secure transmission, every council meeting, every military preparation. We saw it all. Impossible. Our encryption was compromised the moment you shared your quantum communication protocols with the US during the Goodwill Exchange," Blackwood finished. "We created back doors into every system you thought you were teaching us to use." Klox'rith's mind reeled. "If you knew, why didn't you strike first? Why allow the attacks to occur?" The question hung in the air. Banks and Blackwood exchanged a glance that contained volumes of unspoken meaning. "2 reasons," Banks finally said. "First, we needed irrefutable proof to present to the Galactic Concordat. Your unprovoked attack provided that. And second," continued Blackwood, leaning forward, "humans have a saying, revenge is a dish best served cold. We wanted you to experience the same false security you offered us. The same trust before betrayal." The full weight of human psychological warfare crashed down on Klox'rith. "You sacrificed 14 million of your own people just to justify this vendetta?" Captain Banks' expression hardened. "We evacuated as many as we could in secret. The casualties were fewer than you believe. But yes, some died to spring your trap. Their sacrifice ensured the survival of our species against an enemy who planned our complete extermination." "There's something you need to understand about humans," Blackwood said, standing to pace the small room. "We can forgive mistakes. We can forgive failures. We can even forgive attacks when they come from declared enemies. But betrayal?" He shook his head slowly. "Betrayal by those we trusted, those we welcomed and aided? That awakens something primal in us. Something that doesn't stop until balance is restored." "Never forgive, never forget," Banks added, the phrase sounding like a religious invocation. "It's coded into our DNA from thousands of years of tribal existence. Those who betrayed the tribe threatened its survival, and so they had to be removed. Not just killed, but erased, to send a message to all others." The final confrontation at the Vesperian capital began 3 days later. Klox'rith watched from the Vengeance's observation deck as the human fleet took position around Vesperia Prime. The remaining Confederation military forces had consolidated there, a last stand to protect the cradle of their civilization. What should have been the greatest battle in galactic history never actually occurred. Instead, Admiral Blackwood transmitted a simple message to the Vesperian Defense Force. "Your leadership has been removed. Your military capabilities are known to us down to the last vessel. Your technological advantages have been neutralized. Now witness the mercy you failed to show our colonies." With that, the human fleet activated what appeared to be standard communication arrays. But instead of transmissions, they projected a hemisphere of energy that enveloped the entire planet. Within seconds, every Vesperian weapon system, from orbital platforms to personal sidearms, simply deactivated. "Targeted electromagnetic pulse," Captain Banks explained to Klox'rith as they watched. "Designed specifically to affect Vesperian technology while leaving civilian infrastructure intact. Another innovation we developed during our 30 days of silence." When the remaining Vesperian military commanders realized they had been rendered completely defenseless without a single shot fired, they had no choice. The unconditional surrender was transmitted on all frequencies within the hour. The war that never truly began was over. The hunt had reached its conclusion. And the message to the galaxy was clear: betraying humanity was tantamount to signing your own death warrant. 3 months after the surrender, Klox'rith sat in a larger, slightly more comfortable cell aboard the orbital station now positioned above Vesperia Prime. Tomorrow, the human tribunal would deliver its judgment on his role in what galactic historians were already calling the Betrayal War. He had no illusions about his fate. Every other member of the Vesperian High Command who had authorized the attack had been sentenced to permanent exile on a barren moon orbiting a distant star. They would live out their days with only the most basic necessities, forever contemplating their miscalculation. Such was human justice. Not death, but consequence. Not vengeance, but remembrance. The door to his cell slid open, and Captain Banks entered, now wearing the formal uniform of the United Earth Diplomatic Corps. Her promotion had come swiftly after the war. "Ambassador," she greeted him, the old habit persisting despite everything. "I haven't been an ambassador for some time," he replied wearily. Banks sat across from him. "You know, our xenopsychologists have been studying your species intensively since the conflict ended. They believe we've identified the fundamental error in your assessment of humanity." "Oh?" Klox'rith's breathing apparatus wheezed softly. "And what profound insight have your scholars gleaned?" "You judged us by your evolutionary standards," Banks said simply. "The Vesperians evolved as solitary apex predators who formed civilizations of convenience. Trust, to your kind, is merely a temporary tactical advantage. Betrayal is expected, even respected when executed well." She leaned forward. "Humans evolved as tribal prey animals who survived through cooperation. Trust, to us, is sacred. Betrayal doesn't just damage relationships, it threatens the very foundation of what makes us human." Klox'rith considered this. "A species that values loyalty above self-interest. We couldn't conceive of such a thing. And that was your downfall." Banks stood, pacing the small cell. "Which brings me to why I'm here. The tribunal has asked me to explain why you, of all the Vesperian leadership, were kept aboard human vessels rather than immediately imprisoned with the others." A question that had haunted Klox'rith for months. "I've wondered that myself." "Because you were the face of the betrayal, Klox'rith. You were the one who smiled at our diplomatic functions while planning our destruction. You were the one who broke bread with us while measuring our coffins." Her voice remained calm, but her eyes held the cold fire he had come to recognize in humans. "We wanted you to witness everything, to understand exactly what you awakened." She moved toward the door, then paused. "Your sentence will be different from the others. You'll be returning to Vesperia as a cultural liaison. Your task will be to ensure that every generation of Vesperians understands what happened and why. You will be the living reminder of the lesson your species learned at such great cost." As the door closed behind her, Klox'rith gazed out the small viewport at the blue-green marble of his homeworld. Already, human ships were delivering aid and helping rebuild infrastructure damaged during the brief conflict. True to their word, they had targeted only military assets and leadership. Civilian casualties had been minimal. Mercy after victory. Another concept the Vesperian Confederation had failed to understand. And across the galaxy, other species who had observed the conflict were hastily reassessing their own diplomatic stances toward humanity. Trade agreements were being honored with newfound diligence. Borders were being respected with meticulous care. Ancient rivalries were being set aside in favor of transparent cooperation with the humans. For the galaxy had learned what the Vesperian Confederation had discovered too late. Humans might forgive 1,000 transgressions, but betrayal was not among them. And those who broke faith with humanity did not merely risk defeat. They signed their own extinction.